Good evening, folks, and welcome to our first PNN broadcast. We will be going through the news in the past, and we will find out what happened last week, 100 years ago in the world. We've chosen 3 newspapers to follow: The Sun, The New York Times, and The Times from London. We tried to select interesting and eye-opening news from those papers. Thank you for watching. We will go through day by day to create a clear timeline for you. 5th of May. Monday, 5th of May was one of the hottest of early May days in New York in the records of the big town officially, which means aloft and unofficially, particularly on the sidewalks, temperatures soared to midsummer figures. The giant instrument in front of the World Building marked 90 for more than an hour after 3:30 in the afternoon. Only a few persons in automobiles appeared in overcoats. Even a straw hat might not have been ridiculed. It had defied tradition and come out of winter storage. It was one of the most gorgeous spring days in the wooded boroughs and parks that ever stirred the pulses of spring poets and inspired the birds to melody. The breeze, mostly from the south, was zephyrish, and the park benches, notably those at the Battery, facing the breeze, were all taken from noon until near sunset. Excursion steamboats did a great business. The aspect of the town was summer-like. Government troops have captured the whole of Munich with the exception of the Ganhen quarter, where the communists have made frequent attempts to negotiate to secure more favorable conditions. Premier Hoffmann, however, has reiterated his demand for their unconditional surrender. The communists made a bitter defense, but it proved ineffective against the government's artillery. The dead are estimated to number 200. The Berlin government has declared that its troops will be withdrawn as soon as order has been restored. The failure of the Munich insurrection marks the collapse of the last important communist stronghold in Germany, and for the time being the Ebert and Scheldman government is having a deep sigh of relief, once more thanking the fairy goddess who bequeathed them Herr Norsk, their Minister of Defense. The irony of fate decreed at the moment when Field Marshal von Hindenburg announced his retirement as Chief of the Army that Gustav Noske, 6 months ago, an unknown person of military caliber with the ragged remnants of foreign battalions, hurriedly recruited volunteer regiments, should now be winning the nation's acclaim in the sordid internecine guerrilla warfare that is not wholly without its opera buffet setting. In a seclusion that is mournful rather than dignified, the German peace delegates are awaiting the presentation of the peace treaty. And with the same feeling of apprehension, the Damasilis must have contemplated the overhanging sword. The whole atmosphere of the Versailles neighborhood in which the Germans are waiting gives one of the impression of Sing Sing Death House. The limousine, in which Count von Brockdorff-Rantzau, pale and ill-looking, goes for a ride daily, reminds one of a hearse. Henry Perry, alias Beckett, the man who was arrested on Friday at East Ham in connection with the Forest Gate murders, was brought before the West Ham magistrates on Saturday. He was charged with murdering Walter Cornish, aged 42, Alice Cornish, aged 38, Alice Cornish, aged 14, and Marie Cornish, aged 5, at 13 Stockley Road last Monday. Evidence was given of a statement made by Perry after his arrest. In it, he confesses to having committed the quadruple crime and describes in some detail how it was carried out. He also refers to his service with the army in Egypt and Palestine and his being taken prisoner by Arabs. The prisoner is a short man with a brown mustache with something of the appearance of a gypsy. When he was taken away from the police court at the end of the hearing, he had to be guarded by the police from a large and hostile crowd. Events continue to progress in a normal manner. the tramway strikers and railway employees are working again. On the other hand, the students have issued a statement that they will resume their studies when they are inclined to do so, but as they have been given until May 3rd to return to their colleges, there is still time for them to learn reason. Reports from all parts show that tranquility reigns everywhere, but in Cairo there is still some quarters a certain amount of political talk with a considerable undercurrent of excitement. It is satisfactory, however, that so far, as has been ascertained of late, there have been no further hostile acts during the past week. 6th of May. Confirmation of the unconditional surrender of the Hungarian government has been received in a dispatch from Vienna. Soon after peace is signed, it is probable a plan will be submitted to the next Congress for American capital, an enterprise to assist in the economic reconstruction of Europe, as American food is now assisting in its moral reconstruction. This idea is in the back of the minds of President Wilson's financial advisors, who have turned down a proposal that the United States participate with the Allies in endorsing a German $5 billion bond issue. This does not mean, however, that any effort will be made to discourage the entrance of American capital into Germany. It can be definitely stated that the old Allied idea of war after the war and an economic boycott on Germany has been discredited once and for all. In most of the specifications of up-to-date and high-class motorcycles, one finds words to this effect. Provision is made for the fitting and driving motorcycles, if not progressive. What is good enough in the way of equipment of a 1,000-pound car is not too good for them. It is perfectly clear that the days remaining to acetylene lightning for motorcycles are numbered. One believes that it is only the price of the self-contained electric installation which prevents the manufacturer from making it an integral part of his machines. He knows very well that the demand for it exists and that a large majority of riders will eventually fit it. Otherwise, he would not arrange for it to be conveniently mounted and driven. But he is, perhaps justifiably, rather frightened to add something which would make the price of a fairly high-powered solo mount come out at well over the 3 figures. For the moment, he does his best to make the price, in spite of increased labor and material costs, look as low as possible, and one is persuaded that this is a sound enough policy. But that is a transitional one, there can be no reasonable doubt. Now that the rising in Egypt has taken place, men's tongues are loosed, and it can be gathered that the rising was originally planned for 1915, when the Turks were on the eve of attacking the Suez Canal, but the Fellahin would have none of it then. They were not going to displace their true friends of the British for their sham friends, the Turks. When by November 1918, by sheer mismanagement, we had driven the Fellahin into hostility to us, the rising was planned for July 1919. In July, the extra country would have been denuded of all extra troops, and the coming flood would have made irrigation easy. The ringleaders planned wisely. 7th of May. 400 persons were killed in Moscow last week when the Red Guard was called upon to disperse rioters, says an Exchange Telegraph dispatch quoting advices from East Germany. The casualties resulted when crowds assembled demanding food and shouting, "Down with Lenin and Trotsky." That President Wilson has decided to keep American troops indefinitely in Russia and systematically to reinforce these troops from the United States became known today when the War Department announced that 8,000 men are to be enlisted immediately for service in Siberia. This new force, which must be composed of seasoned men, will include 7,000 infantry and detachment of men from the Ordnance, Signal Corps, Quartermaster, and medical branches. It is to be shipped as rapidly as possible in detachment 500 via the Presidio, San Francisco, and Vladivostok. The understanding here is that orders from the new Foreign Service for American troops have come from the President without explanation. It is known that the Japanese government recently decided to increase its forces in Siberia, which now number about 50,000. And the desire of European governments to see additional forces sent may have forced the President to order Americans to this duty. It is known that the President had hoped to withdraw American forces from Siberia and elsewhere in Russia instead of sending new forces to face hardships on distant foreign soil. But the United States is cooperating with European nations on joint military enterprises. The decision reached by the European powers must prevail, even to the extent of assigning American troops to special foreign duty. Today, the peace terms of the Allied and associated powers will be communicated to the German plenipotentiaries at Versailles. Our political correspondents in Paris, in a review of the work of the conference, indicate in detail the terms to be presented to the Germans. The treaty was approved at a private plenary session of the conference yesterday, though there were a number of protests. Marshal Foch declared that the security granted to France was, from the military point of view, inadequate. The situation immediately before the decision of the Italian government that the principal Italian delegates should return to Paris is explained by our political correspondents. In the House of Commons yesterday, Mr. Cecil Harmsworth announced that His Majesty's government had now recognized the Republic of Finland and the Finnish government. By the Treaty of Frederikshamn, September 17, 1809, the Grand Duchy of Finland was ceded by Sweden to the Emperor of Russia. By special grant of the Tsar Alexander I, its Swedish constitution dating from the year 1772 and reformed in 1789 was preserved. Certain modifications were introduced in 1869 and again in 1882. During the latter half of the 19th century, Russian bureaucracy was increasingly in conflict with the defenders of the Finnish constitution, and the conflict became violently acute on the accession of the late Tsar, who, in the February Manifesto in 1899, virtually abrogated the legislative power of the Finnish Diet. In July 1901, a military law was promulgated amalgamating the Finnish with the Russian forces. Russian officials and the Russian language were forced on the people, and in 1903 the Russian General Bobrikov was given dictatorial powers. The Finns sullenly and doggedly resisted these encroachments upon their liberties, and in November 1905 a national strike was instituted. After 6 days, the Russian authorities capitulated and the Tsar issued a manifesto on November 7th, restoring the status quo ante 1899. But the Finnish demands for reform went further. On the assembling of the new Diet, it proceeded to amend the constitution on the basis of universal suffrage, freedom of press, and the right of public meeting. The Russian bureaucracy, though baffled for a time, sought again to limit the powers of the Finnish Diet by insisting that the imperial government should have the final decision in all Finnish questions affecting the empire. In 1910 and 1911, the Finnish Diet, in spite of repeated dissolutions, maintained a bitter opposition to Russia on the subject of equal rights with Finns for Russians residing in Finland, and which was the embitterment of the Finns that when the war broke out, many of them went to fight in the German ranks against Russia. On July 20, 1917, the Finnish Diet declared its independence. 8th of May. Reports of an alliance between the United States, France, and Great Britain supplementing the peace treaty have developed the fact that while no offensive or defensive alliance is contemplated, yet the chiefs of the three governments are discussing such a pact, or an agreement to meet the French demand for military security against renewed German aggression. Such a plan would, if formulated, be submitted to the United States Congress for such action as Congress might see fit to take. It is said that this is in no sense a treaty, such being, of course, beyond the President's constitutional powers, but in the nature of a statement of facts relating to the French claims. Neither does it contemplate unlimited guarantees of security, but rather security with reasonable limits of time and of general character. The Bolsheviki in great strength have begun an attack on Vilna, the capital of Lithuania, which was captured several weeks ago by the Poles, according to a Kovno dispatch received in Berlin and forwarded by the Exchange Telegraph Company. Vilna is said to be under intense artillery fire. Heavy fighting has occurred. When the Polish forces captured Vilna recently, they seized and shot Adolf Joffe, the former Bolshevik ambassador at Berlin, according to Polish newspapers received there. Shortly after 3 o'clock this afternoon, on 7th of May, the terms upon which the Allied and associated powers offer peace to Germany were presented to the enemy delegates at the Trianon Palace Hotel. The people of Versailles, one must suppose, are case-hardened to historical spectacles. The authorities had thought that a large crowd of sightseers would throng the streets to see the enemy representatives pass by to receive the terms of peace, which the Allies. But the crowd which waited today outside the Trianon Palace Hotel, though it would have done honor to the wedding of a local prefect, came a bad second in comparison with the excited throng which habitually fills Versailles at presidential elections. "12 fresh cases of rabies were reported to the Board of Agriculture yesterday from various parts of the country. 2 cats were among the animals affected, one at Brixton and the other at Kington, Herefordshire. The recent cases have resulted in the further extension of the muzzling order, the London and home counties area now including the remainder of the county of Surrey, the western position of Kent as far east as Chatham, and Tunbridge Wells, part of the Essex coast south of the river Blackwater and Chelmsford. Another outbreak has been confirmed near Dover, and the board has therefore imposed the muzzling order on portions of the county of Kent not included in the order referred to above. The new order comes into force in these areas as from tomorrow, but until May 15, dogs may be taken out without a muzzle provided they are on a leash. 9th of May. The accompanying map shows the course traveled by the Navy Hydro airplanes yesterday in their first leg of their transatlantic flight. The voyage will be made in 6 legs or laps, and the distances are here given both in sea miles and statute miles. The Hungarian Communist government has refused the armistice terms offered by Romania and has decided to fight to the utmost, a dispatch from Budapest says. In reply to the Hungarian request for an armistice, the Romanian government demanded the disarmament of forces fighting against Romania and her allies in the present operation, the surrender of war material, and the return of prisoners and hostages without reciprocity. It was added that until the terms were fulfilled, Romania would occupy the right bank of the Theiss River to a depth of 12 miles. It was announced yesterday at the office of William McAdoo, Chief City Magistrate, that Governor Alfred Smith had signed the bill providing for simplification of the procedure in the Domestic Relations Court, and giving, among other things, deserted wives and mothers power of appealing directly to the courts for relief. The measure was returned to the governor a few days ago with the approval of Mayor John F. Hillen. It was drafted by Chief Magistrate Dooley and Koenig of the Domestic Relations Court. There is a distinct divergence of opinion whether or not women will be leaders in the commercial world of the future. The divergence of opinion is not a sex one. There are men who, having found the right woman, believe firmly in the business capacity of the sex, and men, on the other hand, who have no intention of allowing any woman to control any part of their business or to grant that any woman would be capable of such a feat. There are quite a number of women, too, who, being inferior intelligence themselves, would not accept direction from a woman and refuse the woman boss. It is this group of women which forms the principal argument in the case put forward by the men who refuse to acknowledge that women can ever become leaders in business. Women won't follow men, they say, and when they have said this, they think they have said all. But if they acknowledge that many men object to women holding big commercial positions and are reluctant to work under them, they would be near the truth. The woman who objects to a woman boss objects to her in her heart of hearts because she feels that men do not like working under a woman, and being of the cheap grade business as in fashion, follows the lead of such men without testing on what it is based. 10th of May. A Russian government wireless message received today says that an Afghan mission has arrived at Moscow to establish relations between Afghanistan and Russia. This is in violation of the treaty between Afghanistan and Great Britain, under which Afghanistan is not allowed to enter into any relations with any foreign country except Great Britain. General Sir A. Barrett, in command in northern India, has begun operations against the Afghan tribesmen, who crossed the Afghan border and occupied positions on the Indian side. Reuters Limited learns that the advance of the British mobile columns in the neighborhood of the northwest frontier is having a reassuring effect. We are informed that the Committee of the Imperial War Museum have obtained the use of the main building of the Crystal Palace and will open an Imperial War exhibition there next summer. This proposal was approved by the Treasury some days ago, and the arrangements for the transfer of the building to the committee were finally settled with the Crystal Palace trustees on Thursday. That's it for today. Thank you very much for watching, and we will see you next week. Bye. Hello again. My name is Christina, and thank you for joining us this week for Past News Network, PNN. We'll be going through news from 100 years ago, and we've selected interesting news from the Sun from New York and the Times from London. Both newspapers cover similar world events, but we've tried to choose different news from each one. 1919 is an interesting and a memorable year in history, and as we will see, big things happened in the world last week. Previously, we had the Allies present the peace treaty for World War I, and now we get to see the results of that presentation. 12th of May. Freedom in a year is Ireland's hope. Michael F. Ryan, Edward Dunn, and Frank P. Walsh, representatives of Irish societies in the United States, yesterday visited the Sinn Féin prisoners in Mountjoy Prison and later called on Archbishop Walsh. At a reception tendered them by the Lord Mayor, Members of the corporation adopted resolutions wishing the American success in their efforts to secure Irish freedom. Germany is staggered at price she must pay for peace. Nation is in fury, denounces terms as verdict of death, Foch to return to the front, and Germans send new notes. Germany today is in a state of mental catalepsy as the first effect of the peace terms. The treaty admittedly is a crushing blow, far severe than even the most confirmed pessimist had anticipated. Until the peace treaty was received, a large part of the public, as well as numerous officials, were looking at peace through the Wilson mirror, as they conceived it, and for the moment something akin to paralysis has set in. There is a rigidity of absolute consternation, it might almost be horror, as the Versailles operation table and the full extent of the capital operation to which Germany is expected to submit is revealed in an unexpected light. From London News, design of the British War Medal. The question of the design of the British War Medal to be issued in commemoration of the present war discussed in 1917, when it was decided that a committee should be assembled, consisting of eminent representatives of the Royal Academy, the Royal Society of British Sculptors, the British Museum, the National Gallery, and the Royal Mint, to determine the best method of obtaining the most artistic and suitable designs. 13th of May. German hopes in president are crushed. The American and Allied conditions of peace, limiting the German army to 100,000, mean at this time nothing short of delivering Germany over as a prize to anarchy, Gustav Noske, Minister of National Defense, declared today. Noske, the one man who saved Germany from anarchy since the revolution, spoke with intense bitterness of Wilson's duplicity, touching upon what he characterized as the impossibility of restoring and maintaining order in Germany under the present conditions with the force prescribed by the term. Unemployment donation frauds. More persons were sharply punished in different parts of the country in England yesterday for unemployment donation frauds. Magistrates commented on the prevalence of the offense. One of the punished individuals was as young as 15 years old, while the others were older. One of them was a mother of 2. Canada and aliens. There is some feeling in the country that the J.A. Kelder's bill to amend the Immigration Act is not stringent enough. An element in the West demands the absolute exclusion of all immigrants who are averse to military service or who do not accept unreservedly all the obligation of citizenship. In this movement against alien enemies, pacifists and consequentialist objectors, the Canadian Club of Winnipeg and the Great War Veterans Associations are very active. Mr. Gelder's bill authorizes the government to prohibit or limit in number for a stated period or permanently the landing in Canada or the landing at any specified port or ports of entry in Canada of immigrants of any specified class or occupation because of any economic, industrial, or other condition temporarily existing in Canada, or because such immigrants are deemed unsuitable having regard to the climatic, industrial, social, educational, labor, or other conditions or requirements of Canada. 14th of May. Build ships in the US for Europe. France, Italy, and other European countries may place orders for as much as 3 million gross tons of shipping with American shipyards as a result of an order by President Wilson today permitting the building of such ships for foreign accounts, provided it could be done without interference with the construction of the American merchant marine. The order was announced in a statement issued at the White House and was promulgated at the suggestion of Edward N. Hurley, chairman of the Shipping Board. Education and the soldier. An army order has been issued entitled Education Training Armies of Occupation, which supersedes the educational training scheme of September 24, 1918, the order dealing with the education of a soldiers and the educational training scheme 2nd of December 9, 1918. The present pamphlet deals with principles, organization, system, and curriculum and methods of teaching. Under the first heading, it is stated that educational training is to be regarded as an essential element in the making of a soldier and an army in view of the necessity that a modern soldier should be quick, intelligent, and as far as possible of a ready understanding, and also in view of moral and of the provision of a link with civil life. Naval cooperation. Rear Admiral Sims, lately commanding the American fleet in British waters, describing the Allied and the American fleets at a meeting here last night, said that of the 205 submarines sunk in the naval engagements during the war, 90% were destroyed by the vessels of the British fleet. The American and British navies, he said, had proved that the two great nations could cooperate in every detail necessary to the winning of victory. 15th of May. US will take active hand in Turkey's fate. The American mission now expects to finish its work of making peace by June 10th, if not a little before. This covers not only the signing of the German and Austrian treaties, but the settlement, so far as the United States is concerned, of Turkish and Bulgarian questions, in which President Wilson intends to take an active part, although America will not be a party to the treaty. Empty seats in theaters. It is hardly surprising to find that the heat wave has had an immediate effect upon the places of entertainment. Something in the nature of a minor slump set in on Saturday, and it has continued during the present week. Theaters presenting more serious forms of entertainment were the first to be affected, though there were one or two notable exceptions to the general rule. Entertainments which a week ago were playing to capacity have now empty seats for the first time for weeks. But managers are not inclined to grumble. They realize that they have enjoyed an extraordinary spell of prosperity, and no one believes that the boom is yet at an end. Suicide after wife murder. A professional athlete named Harold Channel committed suicide at Old Paradise Street, Lambeth, yesterday morning after murdering his wife. The young woman, who was recently at the WAAC, was found lying on the bed with her throat cut, and the man, whose fall from the bedroom window first aroused attention, was so severely injured that he died soon after removal to St. Thomas Hospital. Equal franchise for women. The Women's Emancipation Bill was discussed in Grand Committee yesterday. A number of women were present. On the consideration of Clause 1, which reads, "A woman shall not be disqualified by sex or marriage from holding any civil or judicial office or place of profit or trust under His Majesty, his heirs and successors, or under any authority or body corporate of unincorporated, deriving powers directly of or indirectly from any act of Parliament, order in council, charter, or franchise whatsoever." Commander Bellard said that some protests should be made against it. His protest was against what he regarded as the emasculation of what were the pledges of the Labour Party at the general election. Personally, he was in favor of opening the ranks of every profession to women, free of all restraints, on the basis of equal pay and equal outlook. The clause was ordered to stand part of the bill. 16th of May. "We won't sign" is a German cry as they unite. 13th of May was a day of protest through Germany. A day of protest against the American and Allied peace terms that have been offered to the German people. The resentment began slowly, as if the German people needed time to wear in to shake off the stupefaction resulting from the first publication of the peace conditions. Gradually, but with ever-increasing spontaneity, it increased until tonight that there is a chorus of protest from all sections of the country. It is swelling into a grand crescendo of no. British Bolshevists in high places. A largely attended meeting was held at the Cannon Street Hotel yesterday afternoon to protest against Bolshevism. Lord Ampthill, who presided, said they had undertaken duty of protesting because the great traditional historic parties in this country, the Unionist Party and the Liberal Party, were incapable of doing anything of the kind. Bolshevism was being propagated in this country and money was being spent to a very large extent. There was only one way of meeting propaganda, and that was by counter-propaganda. For this purpose, they required money. War pensions. The Select Committee dealing with the subject of war pensions met again yesterday, Sir Montagu Barlow presiding. Sir L. Worthington Evans, Minister of Pensions, gave further evidence dealing with alterations to the warrant under which pensions are granted. Some material alterations were already in practice by Treasury sanction. There were further alterations for which Treasury sanctions has been applied. The first of these proposed alterations was an alteration to Article 6 of the warrant, so that maximum retired pay should be given to an officer who is certified to be incapacitated for work and for whom non-institutional treatment was recommended. At present, the deciding factor was whether the treatment was institutional or non-institutional. In his opinion, the question was clearly one of incapacity. 17th of May. Chinese loan is nearly arranged. Arrangements for a loan of $100 million to China are nearing completion, according to information obtained in reliable banking circles yesterday. The loan will be participated in by the United States, England, France, and Japan, with a reservation for Belgium when that country is again able to take part in the transaction. Banks in at least 8 American cities will be among the participants, and the final details of the big scheme are expected to be worked out immediately after the return of interested bankers who are in Europe. A British officer's death in Germany. Mr. Justice Horridge refused probate yesterday of a letter which was sent by an officer who died a prisoner of war in Germany. The letter perpetrated to dispose of an estate valued at £140,000. The testator was Frederick Tyrrell Godman of Wibblestead, Sussex. He was a director of Whitbread's Brewery, and he took a commission in the Royal Sussex Regiment in 1915. He was wounded in France and was taken prisoner in September 1915. He died in October 1915. He left 2 sons. One of them, Richard, died after his father. Hungarian anarchy. The position of the country districts in Hungary is as bad as it can be, and considerable tightening has been going on in the countryside. At one place where a party shut themselves up in a castle, the Red Guard brought up artillery, whereupon the besieged surrendered. Nearly all were shot and several were hanged from the church door. That's it for today. Thank you very much, and I'll see you again next week.